And Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan joins us now. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us this morning. NBC Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has the first question. Andrea?
Thank you very much, Mika. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, the President has offered to mediate. Would you like to see him mediate between you and Prime Minister Modi and try to resolve this Kashmir issue?
Andrea, definitely. We feel that the U.S. President, head of the most powerful country in the world, the only person actually who could make a difference right now is President Trump, if he can mediate between us. Because there is, as you report mentioned, there's a huge humanitarian crisis brewing up. 8 million people have been locked inside in Kashmir now for almost 53 days. And so we hope that the U.S. President intervenes.
There are concerns, of course, you're both nuclear states. Are the tactical nuclear weapons forward based at this point? Can you reassure Americans that what used to be known as the triple key to make sure that the U.S. also had oversight over any potential use of nuclear forces is still in place?
Andrea, no sane mind can think of nuclear war or nuclear weapons. What needs to be done is that this thing should be immediately nipped in the bud. Where it is heading right now, my fear is that there are 900,000 troops in the valley, and they've locked in 8 million people. Now, the fear is that once they lift the curfew, there's going to be bloodshed. And that's why we want the President to intervene before things go a step further. And that's really my concern right now. And I mainly came to the UN to raise this with the world leaders.
Mr. Prime Minister, this is Ayman Mohideen, and I was curious, sir, to pick up on your point, wanting the United States to mediate. You've obviously sat next to President Trump, and you've been dealing with this administration. Has this administration in any way, shape, or form asked you for any type of quid pro quo in exchange for mediating? And if so, what might that be? What does the U.S. want from Pakistan in order to try to mediate this conflict?
This is a completely separate issue. It concerns over 1 billion people of the Indian subcontinent. So this, the United States #1, but United Nations Security Council is the other option. Or the U.S. could operate through the UN Security Council, because there are 11 resolutions by the Security Council on Kashmir. So that's one area. But quite separately, the other two neighbors of Pakistan, one is Afghanistan, the other is Iran. We are trying our best. We are speaking to Iran. I spoke to President Trump, and he thought I should try and mediate between the U.S. and Iran, a nuclear deal. And the other is Afghanistan, which again is in the interest of Pakistan, that there's peace there. I mean, there's 4 decades of conflict. People of Afghanistan are suffering. There's no quid pro quo. I mean, it's in our interest that there's peace there. We were sad that just when the deal was about to be signed, it was broken up, because dialogue and fighting are going on simultaneously, and this was always going to happen. But there is no military solution in Afghanistan, and that should be obvious after 19 years. So it is in our interest that there's peace in both Afghanistan and Iran. The problem with Iran is that if there's a conflict, our country's developing world is going to take a real beating, because the oil prices will shoot up. And in most of our developing world, we have these trying to manage our balancing our budgets. And this will just throw us off. So it's in the interest of actually the world that this Iran conflict does not take place.
Mr. Prime Minister, Jeff Goldberg from The Atlantic, just to follow on your statement that Donald Trump would be the best mediator for you, two related questions. One is, what specific skills do you think he brings to mediating the Kashmir dispute? The second related question is, how do you assess his handling of the Iran files so far in his presidency?
U.S. is, again, I repeat, the most powerful country in the world, and the U.S. can mediate. The U.S. has the clout. Problem I'm facing right now is, unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, and it's being realistic, countries look upon India as a market of 1.2 billion people. And that's what I'm sad to say, that's what the Indian Prime Minister is, that's his leverage. And that's why he's done something so incredible, revoking the Constitution, going against UN resolutions, and he's actually boxed in these people. And so UN being US being the strongest country in the world with leverage in the UN Security Council, and just as the biggest trading partner of India, US has the best leverage, and that's what Mr. Trump has in his hands. About Iran, this is a very difficult situation. It's brewing up for a while. But, you know, I'm an anti-war person. I do not believe wars solve problems. I mean, you go after one problem and it gives birth to 5 other different problems. And therefore, I don't believe that these, because you see, it has unintended consequences. You know, every war which I know, Afghanistan, Pakistan joining the US war in Afghanistan, each time we were told this is a matter of weeks. And, you know, in Pakistan, we lost 70,000 people died in this war on terror when we participated. And Musharraf told us, our general, that it's only a matter of weeks. So war with Iran is very complex. Once it starts, you know, no one knows where it's going to go. And so therefore, always conflicts should be avoided. Always.
Mr. Prime Minister, Joe Scarborough here. The United States and Pakistan, of course, as you know better than anybody, we have had at times a tumultuous relationship. The Pakistanis have believed through the years that Americans have been unreliable partners. We have not followed through on weapons deals. At times, the Pakistanis believe we have pushed them in directions that are not in their national interest. And, of course, Americans have had concerns with the Pakistanis now. Just pulling back from the events of this week, even this month, give us, if you will, your best read on U.S.-Pakistani relations right now. Are we in a better place today than we were, say, 5-10 years ago?
Definitely. This is the best relationship Pakistan had with the U.S. in almost 2 decades. But let me just give you a brief history. Pakistan joined, U.S. and Pakistan got together against the Soviets when they invaded Afghanistan. And so Pakistan trained militants to fight jihad. They were called Mujahideen, who fought against the Soviets. And so these groups came and they operated from Pakistan in the 80s. Come 1989, Soviets retreat from Afghanistan. The U.S. packs up and leaves. And in 91, we were slapped with sanctions, Pressler sanctions. So that was a shock because Pakistan had, by this time, 4 million Afghan refugees. We were left with these militant groups, and sectarian terrorism started in Pakistan. Come 9/11, we again joined the U.S. And I remember George Bush saying that, look, this time it will be different. We are not going to abandon you. Because Pakistanis were skeptical. We had been abandoned. This time again, we joined and I opposed it. And I'll tell you why I opposed Pakistan joining the U.S. Because we had trained these mujahideen, these groups, to do jihad against foreign occupation in Afghanistan. Now, when the Americans turned up in Afghanistan, how are we going to explain to them that now it's no longer jihad, it's terrorism? And so when Pakistan joined the U.S., the same groups turned against Pakistan. And the fundamental mistake Pakistan's leadership made at the time is that they tried to tell the U.S., don't worry, we'll be able to deal with it. They couldn't deal with it. I mean, there were suicide bombings going on in Pakistan. Our GHQ was attacked, our army, our commandos, our ISI. At one point, we actually thought we were going down. And so U.S. kept putting pressure on Pakistan to help them more. Pakistan could not deliver more. There were 150,000 NATO troops. And if they couldn't win in Afghanistan, how was Pakistan going to help them? And so we were then accused of playing a double game because we couldn't deliver. There were 50 different groups operating in Pakistan, militant groups. And so this mistrust began. Now our relationship is based on truth and trust. We are partners in peace now. And so there's trust, and that's how the relationship should have been. If I was the Prime Minister, I would have said, look, Mr. Bush, we cannot deliver. We have these groups trained, and how are we going to, the moment we join them, we lose leverage on them, and they'll turn against us. So I think that's the mistake where our leadership made.
And what advice have you given President Trump about Afghanistan, a war that many Americans have grown tired of 18 years later?
You know, I mean, I kept opposing. I kept saying there is no military solution only because you only have to know the history of Afghanistan. I mean, the British as a superpower went and 3 times failed. Soviets killed 1 million Afghans in the 80s, failed. And how you knew that this was going to be a war that is just would not have achieved any results. Someone should ask, I mean, if I was an American, I would ask that $1.5 trillion at least have been spent in Afghanistan. What have we achieved in this? And then I hear some people saying that, you know, actually, no, we should sort of keep the military or keep this going. This will go on for another 19 years. The taxpayer in U.S. is going to keep pouring in money in there. While the U.S. was pouring money in Afghanistan in this futile war, the Chinese were developing first world infrastructure, and you just have to go to China to see the way their infrastructure is. And I'm in New York, and I'm watching the car bumping around here.
Okay.
That money was wasted.
You know, you do
That
not
money
sound
was wasted.
You do not sound right now like a prime minister from Pakistan. You sound like a voter from the Bronx who would complain about the infrastructure, our money being spent on wars in Afghanistan instead of on fixing LaGuardia and the other infrastructure there and across America. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for being with us.
Imran Khan.